glad to see so many smiling faces here today. What we're going to do today is I've got a presentation that I do about understanding collectible assets and how they are valued and what is value and how does all that work. So we're going to get into that. In addition, I know we are going to do a little bit of an Antiques Roadshow afterward and talk about some of the items people have brought in, and I'm going to talk about what the valuation are on these items. But to get started, today we're going to spend some time talking about where value comes from, tips on determining what items might have value, how to understand collectible values in the context of planning for the future. And I've got stories and experience from our 30 plus years in the business. Important, I always like to point out, I am not here to sell you a product. I know sometimes if you get somebody who stands up and starts talking about their company, you're waiting for the, I've got a $29.95, product to sell you. I don't do that. It's part of what I kind of enjoy about what we do is I'm in the business of helping figure things out. And so I will get into what we do and what we can provide, but there's no sales pitch coming. So today, whether you ever do business with us or not, I hope to give you some solid advice about valuations and help you steer in the right direction if you think you might have something valuable. So who am I? My name is Scott Lovejoy. I call myself the Chief Pathfinding Officer because I help people who have a destination on a map, and I like solving problems. So how do we get you to where you're trying to go if you've got something you want to accomplish? I come from the IT world. I used to work for EDS supporting General Motors. Good morning. And my job was I would sit between the suits and the technical people because I could speak both languages and help translate. I've built websites and done that kind of work in the past. So it's kind of helps me in what I do, that ability to kind of find solutions and solve problems. I've been involved for 30 plus years in the world of collectibles. Our company opened in 1990, and I joined very shortly thereafter. Important to note, I try not to be a blowhard, bloviating about how much I personally know. I don't know everything, but I have people who do, and we have a network we can refer to. So anything that I don't think I know enough about, I always try and get the right eyeballs on it so that we get the right answer. Back to the Past Collectibles was founded in 1990, as I said, so we've been 30 plus years. It was originally a small comic book and movie materials retail store. We started in like 600 square feet back then. What I came along with was sort of the corporate knowledge, the technical knowledge, and in the mid-90s, I said to my buddy Andy, who was mainly running the store, there's this thing called the internet. I think it might be important. We might want to get on there. And so we actually were on the internet in '96, long before broadband. We were one of the first 700 accounts on eBay, actually, back in the day. It was brand new. I bought the company in the meantime, and he headed out to Montana. So in 2018, our main focus really became estate evaluation and live auctions. And so that's really what we do today. We don't even have a retail space anymore. We find collections, we process them, we get them listed online. If you've gone to our website and looked at how we list things, we do weekly auctions, and that's a big focus of what we do. So our mission is to help people find value and bring their treasures to market. And we strive very hard to help the people who are selling, understand what they have and what the best way forward might be, even if that's not us. But in that process, our sellers love us. And then when we describe things to people who buy, we also have a strong reputation because we don't try and sneak things past, we don't try and glue broken things together or call things something they're not. And so we find a really good balance between our sellers are happy, our buyers love what we do, and it generally means when we bring the right things to auction, things do very well. So I want to talk about the term value. What is value? Everybody in here, I'm sure, knows the term. If somebody asks you, what is something worth? And you can repeat along with me that something is worth what someone is willing to pay. right? Everybody knows that. So, and that's very true. So there's a lot of circumstantial import in this, that if you put something in front of someone who has no interest in it, it's worth very little. If you put something and match it up with someone who's very excited about it, there's significantly more value. So how do we do that? That's the question. How something is sold can also affect value. You get the circumstance where there's a fire sale and everything's got to be cleaned out this weekend, and so put $5 on everything and broom it out. It's got to go. Tends to get less in return than slow and steady. Let's put high prices on everything, put them in a showroom, spend 6 months having people walk by them, and generally that can make a big difference. If we're talking about evaluation, we also need to know the purpose of the evaluation. Are we talking about fair market value? Typically, if I take this item and I put it out into the market, what do I think it's going to bring on average? Versus replacement value for insurance. If I'm trying to insure against replacement value, that's generally going to be a higher number, because I want to make sure if I have to go buy one right now that I can afford buying something in a hurry. So the evaluation can have different outcomes depending on precisely what it's for. There's also the old on any given day. A lot of times when you see those headlines, you see a headline that's a crazy number. An Action Comics #1 sold for $2.2 million. Generally, there's a couple of really, really rich people who both decided that was theirs, and they started duking it out, and they've got money to burn. And as an auctioneer, you love it when that happens, because everyone has a really good day. So there is that influence as well. But one of the biggest things about value that I always try and make sure people with items understand is that getting the value. So we have this table, and let's just say we went through this table and we decided this table is worth $10,000. Can anybody take any of these items and go pay their Edison bill? No. It's not money yet. It might be evaluated, but it's not money, and it costs money to get that value out. I like to think if I determine there's an item here and it's worth $100, that $100 is like locked inside a rock. And so how can I get it out? And if I could just push it off the podium and it cracks open on the floor, that's easy. I'll do that all day long for $100. But what if it cost me $95 in time and effort to get that $100 bill out of that rock? Am I that interested? What if it costs $120 to get that $100 out of that rock? So a lot of times when people, if they come to us and they say, I have a $10,000 collection, how will you help me sell it, or what will you do for that? That's not enough information. Because if a $10,000 collection is one $10,000 item of high demand, well, I can sell that for cheap. If I put that in an auction, it's exciting, it'll sell right away, it's not that much work. It might even bring more eyeballs to the auction because it's an exciting item. But if you have 10,000 $1 items, I might not want that you might offer me 80% to do that, and I'm like, I don't know. So we have to consider that when we're talking about value. Sometimes if we pass on a collection, we're not saying the collection has no value, but what we're saying is the labor costs involved might not equate to being able to get that value out. So that's a challenge of handling collections sometimes. So I'll throw this out to the room. When you think about what things are worth, what things might be high priced, what do you think is the biggest driver of value? Demand? Money? Scarcity, that's a good one. Being old? If simply being old created value, then honestly I should be pretty pricey right now. And considering the age of things, I think it's just kind of an interesting point that, the Beatles song, When I'm 64, in 7 years, that song's going to be 64 years old, so kind of neat. But, being old can help, but it doesn't necessarily mean that something's worth more money. It's shocking sometimes. We just handled a book collection for a family. And in that book collection, there were quite a few gem things. But overall, there are books in there that were dating back to the early 1800s, just the most beautiful old books. If you look at them, they look so neat. And we thought, wow, you know, the value on these must be crazy. And it turns out a lot of old books aren't. I don't know if you've ever been involved in handling books. Old books, just because they're from the early 1800s doesn't mean anything. They're neat, but they're not necessarily worth a lot of money unless they hit certain reasons that they are. So simply being old doesn't always make it. Popularity, how popular something was at the time, that can drive value. But it can sometimes oversaturate. I don't know if everybody remembers the explosion in Star Wars toys in the 1990s when Lucas did those second 3 movies. They just made so many toys and everybody was like, I'm going to retire on toys, and everybody bought them. So you know what we find now? Every basement that has toys has a case of 1990 Star Wars toys, and they will never be scarce. And that just means they just aren't going to appreciate in value. If everybody's into something and everybody bought one, it doesn't tend to equate to value. Something rare, what's the scarcity? That can help as well. But sometimes rarity alone means no one's looking for it. I once had a guy who was on a children's program in the 1960s, and there were some things that you would get if you were on the program as one of the kids. So he had this little box of trinkets and buttons and interesting things from this show, and I thought, talk about scarce. How many of these can still exist if you had to be a guest on the show to get one? And we went out and we did some research for him and found the problem is no one's looking for it. It's not anything anybody collects. So strictly scarcity doesn't always mean that something is worth money. Materials can matter. If you think about comic books are just paper, but an old coin could be silver or gold. So there's an intrinsic value maybe in the material of the item versus one that isn't. So that can make a difference. But here's really, this is to me, this is the key equation. We need nostalgia and scarcity. And that's when we get value. So there's enough nostalgia that people are excited about some stuff, but there's enough scarcity that it's not easily available. And if we get that combination, that's when the value of things goes up. So there is this sliding window of nostalgia. I picture it as a window that moves through time. And nostalgia increases things that you had as a kid or from a previous era. We get more nostalgic about those things. At the same time, stuff gets thrown away, it gets lost, whatever, so that maybe the availability of the item goes down, and that's the sweet spot where we get the rise of nostalgia versus lack of items to buy. That's the sweet spot. But it's also important to understand that this window is constantly moving. So there is an effect where we get a peak of value, but at some point, the people who are really into whatever that was, they get old enough, they start to retire, they sell off their collection, they're not buying anything anymore, so there's one less collector and there's one more collection. We see this happening right now in, although we don't handle glassware in China and things like that, but I talk to people in those circles, and right now, I'm sure you're all experiencing this, kids do not want your China. And that's just this, it's like a shift in cultural taste where just the old idea of having the big china cabinet full of all that stuff in the dining room, it's just not something that this next generation is interested in. And I mean, I've been in houses where they've got, I'm not talking about art van furniture, but beautiful old, stick-built dining room cabinets, just beautiful pieces of furniture. And they're like, do you know anyone who wants this? I'll give it to them for free. And they can't find anyone to just take it for free. So it is important to understand that cultural tastes change. Another thing that's true for is old Western stuff. 20 years ago, if you had Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, old Cap Guns, Lone Ranger, if you had that kind of stuff and it was in nice shape and it was the harder to find stuff, that stuff was gold. I could make all kinds of money selling that all day long. Now, just the difference in the last 20 years. Ask a kid who Roy Rogers was or who Gene Autry was, and there's this difference about our view of old Western stuff now, and there's just not as much of a demand. So the value starts to fall. So it's important to understand that will happen. So in talking about value, I do want to dispel some myths. Headlines do not necessarily reflect the real market. If you see that headline that says that an Action Comics #1 sold for $2 million, that's pretty awesome, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your drawer full of old junk Archies is worth any more today than it was yesterday. So it's just important that those things are not necessarily connected. TV shows, everybody's watching TV shows, American Pickers, Storage Wars, Pawn Stars, and Antiques Roadshow to a lesser degree. That's a little bit more accurate. But a lot of those shows, they are built to be entertaining. They're not built to educate. They're not trying to be as accurate as possible. When I watch Storage Wars, it actually gets me up. Yeah, I start getting stressed because of those statements. They'll just make these broad. Look at this. I found this in a storage unit, and at the end they just kind of go, and that's $30,000. And I'm like, no, it's not. I've seen what it is they're selling. It's not, so they don't really care whether that information's right or not. They're just built for entertainment. So it's important that things you see there, you don't necessarily draw too much truth out of. And of course, nothing is forevermore true. I shared that, sliding cultural window with you. So things that I could tell you today that are absolutely hard, fast, well, they're going to change. And then every rule about value has exceptions. So Beanie Babies are worthless. Well, except there's a couple that aren't. No one wants China. Well, except that there are some good China pieces that are worth a lot of money. Any of these things, it's nothing is without its exceptions. So just a few points to keep in mind as we go through. Where do collections generally come from? It's our experience. Why do people call us? And we refer to it as the 5 Ds: debt, death, divorce, downsizing, and they're not all bad, maybe dreams. But there generally has to be some kind of life transition. There's a reason. Something has happened. We need to downsize. There's an old house and it's full of stuff. What do? We need to clean it out. And the reason I bring this up is just in terms of planning ahead. It's really, really important that you think about what you might have and what you want to do with it, because we run into every day the phone rings and it's a family and Uncle Bob passed away and look, he's got all this stuff and no one has any idea what any of it is, or where did he get it, or what's good and what isn't. Do we need a dumpster, or do we need to get a Brinks truck for all the gold we're going to haul in because of selling this stuff? And it's important to understand nobody will ever understand what that collection is as well as the person who collected it. So figuring it out when you have that information in hand, it's really important. We had a family that we had a customer in our store, and he'd been shopping with us for decades, and he told his family, anything ever happens to me, make sure you go to Back to the Past and I'll treat you square on my stuff. And he bought comics and toys and coins and things like that. Well, the family went through, the executor of the will, where you kind of have to specify, there's property, there's this, and put valuations on them. And they had gone through and we have a house, it's worth this, there's bank accounts worth this. They did break out the coin collection because that was a little bit more, I don't know, however he kept it, it was a little easier to ferret out the value. But then they got to everything else, $2,000. And we thought, we knew what Steve had been buying for all these decades. It's way more than $2,000. But we got to work for him, and it was like a house full of stuff and a storage unit full of stuff. And by the time we got done, we recovered about $60,000 for the family based on that collection. But they were one missed phone call, because they were thinking they're going to call us, and if we're not interested, they were literally going to get a dumpster because they did not know what to do. And so it's just important to remember that whoever inherits the problem may prize not having to deal with it over what it might be worth. And a lot of value can go right into a dumpster just because someone comes in from out of state, they're only here 3 days, they got to make fast decisions. So it's important. So talking about kind of what we do, we're in the pop culture world. So what types of collectible items have value? I'm sure there's nothing here that's going to surprise you. Comic books, sports cards, toys, vinyl records can do very well. Movie paper, like lobby cards, posters, programs, things from the movies. Coins are a big one. So it's not surprising when I say these things can be worth money. However, sometimes it is surprising for people to hear. The truth is, there are vastly more things that aren't worth much than there are things that do have value. In each of these categories, there are companies that have founded themselves on just mass producing collectible items. And generally, if they make something as a collectible, it's never going to be worth anything. So a lot of stuff gets produced that doesn't necessarily have value. So it's important to tell. So here's a few earmarks about how you can tell generally what might have value. In comic books, comics were 10 cents from the 1930s to the late 1950s or around 1960. Then the cover price went to 12 cents for most of the 60s, then it went to 15 cents, and then it climbed pretty fast after that. And so if you look at the cover of a comic book and it's got a price of a dime or 12 cents, it doesn't necessarily instantly mean it's worth a lot of money, but it does mean that it's from an earlier era, in which case the odds go up that you might have something. This is just another interesting point. When comics went from 10 to 12 cents, DC Comics published a letter inside the front cover, and they apologized to those kids. We're so sorry, we had to raise the price of these comics 2 cents. We know you come in with $1 and you expect so many comics for $1, and we know this is going to impact you. And they were so apologetic. And once you hit the 1980s and comics are going to 70 cents and 90 cents, and now comics are like $6, you know, they'll raise the price $1 now and not blink at it. So, but back in the day, they were really, really apologetic about that 2 cents. U.S. coins. Here's another kind of quick way to go, do I have anything that's more potential? 1964 and earlier, dimes, quarters, halves, and dollars are made out of actual silver. After 1964, most coins became what they call clad. If you look at the edge of a coin, it's silver on top and bottom, and it's sandwiched copper in the middle. That makes the coin intrinsically worth less money. So, 1964 or before, you've actually got silver weight is your baseline value, or if they're made out of gold. Movie posters, the ones that they would actually put up in the theaters. Before the 1980s, they're almost all folded. There's very few strictly rolled old vintage movie posters. Most of them are folded. And the one sheet size you would see in the theater are 27 by 41. And they tend to be fan favorite films. You need to find a movie poster of Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Alien, maybe old horror movies. The weekend rom-com, generally that kind of stuff doesn't really bring big value. You need like a fan base who's interested in the movie. Sports cards. This is actually changing a bit. I would say 80s and 90s sports cards, there's a lot of rookie stuff that gets more interest now. But generally speaking, pre-1970 sports cards are going to get the best value, so you're looking for older. And for some reason, baseball is the king of sports cards. We sometimes get old sports cards collections that have hockey or football, and there's a few things in there that are decent, but baseball is far and away the best sports card category. Vinyl records, the format matters. There's the 45 singles, the 33 long players, the old 78 shellacks that were on the old like wind-up tables, if you've ever seen those. And are they in nice shape? Do they include the sleeves? The sleeves are almost always missing or damaged. The outer jackets disappear, and that makes a difference on vinyl records. So, there's a few earmarks of the types of things that you might be looking for. But think about the variables. Condition. Assuming something is decent in the first place, condition is the number one arbiter of where something is going to fall in value. And these days, I don't know if you have brushed up against the collectibles world at all, but these days grading is everything. Everything gets graded. And there are independent grading companies, and they encase things in plastic. Like this is an example. This Iron Fist. They grade things on a 10-point scale, so this Iron Fist comes in at an 8.5, which is decently high grade, but it's not considered near mint. So if we have items that are key, we go and we get them graded by an independent company, and that will then make a huge difference in what the valuation of that piece becomes. I've got a great example here I'm going to share with you. This is a trading card from the 1959 Three Stooges card series. This is a card number 3, which is Curly, and for some reason the first 3 cards are harder to find. So the Curly, Larry, and Moe are in higher demand generally. This card, as nice as it might be, if it's loose, I've just got one in my hand, it's not been graded, we can look at it and go, yeah, that looks pretty nice. A loose copy of this will sell for a couple $100, maybe $200-300. We send this in and we get it graded, and we get an 8, and this card is suddenly worth about $7,000. And the difference is that someone independent has put a numeric grade on it saying that's what it is, and now it's not me, the seller, and you, the buyer, kind of arguing over what do we think it is. It gives us a firm, fast number, and the higher grade something is, the more it goes for. And then what happens in this world is if you get a 10, most everything's on a 10-point scale. If you get a 10, which is almost impossible, very hard to do. I've had cards that I've looked at to me under a microscope, and I'm like, it is perfect in every way. And I will send it in and I'll get a 9. But if you pull that lever, that gambling lever, and you get a 10, this card in a 10, it goes well into 5 figures. It becomes like a $20,000 card if this card gets graded at 10. And it's because there are people in the world with money to burn who want the perfect one. And they will spend a ton of money to be the person that owns the perfect one. So condition is vital. So again, talking about those headlines, if you see a headline and it says that some item is worth some money, and you think, well, I have one, and this happens fairly often. Well, the one that got sold was from a pedigreed collection. It got graded, they got a 10. It was Nicolas Cage's comic book or whatever, and it just blew up into this big sale, and rich people fought over it, and they set record numbers. You could literally have that same item sitting in your closet, but it's all beat up, it's loose, the cover's about to fall off, and it's literally worth a couple $100, at most. So it's just a vast difference on condition. That makes a huge difference. But then kind of quickly run through the rest of these. The provenance, the history, is it what we think it is? Is it from a certain time? There is a huge amount of counterfeit going on in the autograph world. There are far more Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle autographs in the world than they ever signed in person. I mean, by a factor of 2 or 3. They didn't sign a ton of things in their history, but everybody walking in with a sports collection who has some autographs has a Ted Williams or a Mickey Mantle. The forgeries are crazy. So do we have provenance on it? Can we prove that it's real? That makes a big difference. And there are companies similar to the grading that will authenticate autographs, and then it'll come back with a certificate that says that it's real, and that makes a big difference. The version is another thing. So I don't know if there's any Beatles fans in the audience, but if you remember in '66 when they released Yesterday and Today in the US on Capitol, the very first edition of that record came out, and they got an avant-garde photographer. They felt that they had not been treated well by the record labels, and so they kind of made a bit of a political statement. The Beatles posed with doll parts and butcher meat. And so it's the Beatles sitting there in like white jackets with like bacon on their shoulder and doll parts. And they thought that this is avant-garde statement that they're making. And somehow that made it through all the levels of editorial. It got made, it went out to shelves. And when it hit the shelves in the US, there was a reaction. And and Capitol went, we've made a terrible mistake. And so they recalled the albums. Now, some of them had gotten sold, but they recalled the albums. They did a paste over of the jacket that we have now, which is the white cover on that album, and I think it's called the trunk cover. and then reissued those pasted over ones. They sent back out to stores, and then on subsequent pressings of the album, they just pressed that new cover. So this is what's known as the butcher cover. And if you have one of the original albums that were on shelves and it's still in the shrink wrap, they're worth upwards of $80,000 or $100,000 for a Beatles album. That's called a first state. A second state is one that has the pasted over cover, and you can kind of peel up the corner and see there's something underneath it. A second state is still worth several $1,000s. If it's been peeled, which kind of wrecks the cover, if you've ever like peeled off a stamp off an envelope, it's the same kind of thing. That's still worth a couple $100s, even kind of a beat up, a peeled cover, the third state. And then of course you can buy the album as it stands now for like 20 bucks. So what's the difference, right? What's the difference in the music? None. It's the same record. But the entire difference between something that's 20 bucks and something that's pushing $100,000 is which version it is. So it's important to understand that on things like that. So if you see a big number on something and you think, I have one, well, is it exactly the same one, or is it, are there variants? Significance, world events, it's from a particular time and place, can also have an impact. That would affect things like newspaper headlines. Do you have a 1912 newspaper when the Titanic sank, or something like that? Those can be important. And I had mentioned also the materials versus the collectability. All coins, if they're made out of silver or gold, are worth whatever that metal is worth. But there's a collectible factor that goes up and above that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So here's my challenge now to you. Here's some audience participation. Do you have the eye? I'm going to describe 5 items to you that we would look at, like things on the table here, and figure out some evaluation on them. You don't have to take any notes. I'm going to have everything up here on the screen, but I'm going to kind of ramble through these quickly. Our first, and I want you to put these in order in your mind from what you think would be the least expensive to the most expensive. So our first item is a Beatles LP record. This is Rubber Soul. It was issued by Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs as a master recording. It was pressed in 1984. It is sealed in pristine condition. It's brand new. If you look closely, you can see, well, that's kind of blurry. There's actually a $12 price tag on it from when it was originally issued. Our second item is a silver dollar. It's a U.S. Morgan silver dollar from 1878. It's got a Carson City CC mint mark on it, which means that it was minted in Carson City, Nevada. It is a harder to find mint mark, only produced coins from 1870 to 1893 to support the Western Gold Rush years. And as you can see, it's in kind of rough shape. We have a Star Wars movie poster, which we refer to as Style A. It's dated 1977, 20th Century Fox. It is in pristine condition. It measures 12 by 18. Our fourth item is a Supergirl action figure from Ideal, 1967, but you will notice it is the box only, and in fact, it's got some condition issues because her head's ripped off on the packaging. So it's an empty box in rough shape. Our last item is a comic book. It's a Incredible Hulk issue number 181. Was published by Marvel in 1974. It is the first, as you can tell here, it is the first appearance of the X-Men character Wolverine, which if you're into X-Men at all, you know that's a big character. It is in pristine, near mint condition, except for one small thing. Doesn't have a cover. The cover's been stripped off. So that's actually the first page of the comic. But otherwise, it's in perfect shape. So there are our 5 items: the Beatles album, the Supergirl box, the Star Wars poster, the silver dollar, and the Wolverine comic book. So in your mind, what would you think, working from small to big, what do you think is the cheapest item on that list? All right, the lowest cost is the Star Wars poster. And the reason why is it is actually a modern collectible printing that was made in the 1990s when those second 3 movies came out. They were given out to people in the lobby. literally millions of these were made. A true original style A poster would actually measure 27 by 41. It would be significantly bigger. This one's 12 by 18. The most of the actual real ones are folded. Only a few went out rolled. Real style A Star Wars posters these days can bring up to around $2,000 if they're in decent shape. This one's worth about $5, so it makes it the cheapest item on our list. Next one up is the silver dollar. So talking about that difference between the material something's made out of and what the collectability is, a silver dollar like this is just under an ounce of silver. So I don't know what melt price is these days. I think $20, $25, $26 right now. Haven't looked at it the last week. So this coin, in terms of melt price, is worth about $30. And because this one is so banged up, the difference in collectability doesn't really add much to it. So this coin is worth about $50 in this grade. Now, if this was in really high grade, the collectability would make a huge difference to the item. These would be worth about $350 to $400 if they were in really, really nice shape. But this one, not so much, about $40. The next one is the Rubber Soul album, and the reason why is that audiophiles who are really into vinyl believe that this is the best sounding pressing of Rubber Soul that was ever made. It's what they call a half-speed master recording, and because they go through this big analog process to make something like this, they tend to command a lot of money. Because this one is sealed, it's probably worth about $200. If these are open, they're a little less, maybe $125, but sealed in nice shape, they're worth about $200. That gives us our fourth one up is the comic book. Now, generally, when a comic book is coverless, it becomes worthless. If I take a comic and it's worth even $100, and I rip the cover off, it becomes almost worthless because nobody wants a coverless comic. If we get it graded, as I showed you here, a coverless book is considered a 0.5. Doesn't even make a 1 on the scale. Doesn't matter about the rest of the book. It just becomes a 0.5 grade. However, when the value of the book becomes significant, then a coverless copy gives people who want it a place to be and say that they own it, even though they don't own one that would, break them. So, since a high-grade Hulk 181 can sell for $20,000 to $30,000 if this book is in high grade, a coverless copy that's otherwise in really nice shape can still fetch about $500 to $800. So that's about what this comic would be worth. Now, does anybody know why the cover might be stripped off?
Because they took it off the shelf because it didn't sell and went back to the company.
That's it. So the newsstand would get a refund for unsold copies after a certain date. That's why sometimes, and it's frustrating to vintage collectors on old magazines and comics, you'll get someone who will have written a date on it because they could look at the rack and go, after that date I need to pull these. But yes, they would strip, so they wouldn't have to pay the postage, which is a lot of weight. They would rip the cover off and just mail the covers back. And then what they're supposed to do is destroy the rest of the books. But of course, what most local newsstand dealers would do is they would bundle 3-4 comics together and sell them for a quarter or whatever to the kids, and they're more or less selling stolen merchandise. But I don't know, if you grew up in a certain age, you remember walking in and being able to buy old coverless stuff from your newsstand. So that leaves the most expensive item on this list is an empty box, and the reason why is because everybody who plays with toys throws the box away. I see 1967 Supergirl action figures. I mean, not all the time. They are fairly rare to begin with, but I've seen far more of the figures than I've ever seen of the boxes. So I sold this box for almost $1,000 because you can't find them. And so sometimes the dumb things are what are worth money. The box If there are small accessories, well, often the small accessories are worth far more than the action figure is, because they'll lose a boot, they'll lose a hat, whatever. They'll lose those little accessories. That's where the money is on stuff like that. So if you pair the box up with a decent grade figure, the whole kit on something like this would be around $2,000. But even the box itself is worth that much money. So it just gives you, a few ideas of the types of things that happen, as we're going through, figuring those differences out. Do we have something that's a big hit, or do we have something that's not going to be worth as much? So how much is an item worth versus how to bring it to the proper market is a big difference. We can stand here and all agree that Supergirl action figure box is worth $1,000, but if I put it in front of most of you in this room, probably everybody in this room, who is interested in paying me that effective market rate on that box? No one. So getting it in front of the right buyer is really important. The difference between having the right market and not the right market across a whole collection can be absolutely astronomical. So getting in front of the right eyeballs is important. And that differential in value from one item versus an entire collection house full, it really adds up. Another thing, what happens a lot, you see a show like American Pickers, they made a whole show out of it. I show up, you've got this whole building worth of stuff, and I walk out of there with, 2 car parts. That's picking. And understanding whether you want that to be okay or not is an important consideration. In certain cases, if it's a collection that's still dynamic, still getting pieces added in, and kind of the whole process is, I want to sell a few things so I can get a few things, and so it's kind of a, whatever, you're almost in the business of being a dealer, then maybe picking is okay. But what we find for most cases is if it's an issue where I've got this pile of stuff, I've got these old toys, and I need to do something with them, allowing somebody to come in and say, well, you've got 100 things, these are the 5 best ones, that's all I want, I'll pay you really good money for those. It seems great because you extrapolate in your mind, well, if I did that on those, look what I'm going to get for selling this whole collection. But what you're really doing is you're gutting the collection. You're allowing the best things that sell the collection to leave, and you're going to end up with a pile of stuff that nobody wants. And so we generally advise against people letting someone come in and just pick the best things out. And the way I tend to say it is picking can get you a lot for a little, but then nothing for the rest. So you really have to calculate that out, whether that's worth it or not. And then in terms of planning, how much is there to sell? What are all the different categories? Are they selling to the same demographic, to the same potential buyer? Is it really several different collections? That often happens. Here's a house full of stuff, but there's some coins, there's some old National Geographics, there's a stamp collection. You start going, well, these really are different things. And should they all go to the same place, or should they find different homes? Is there already an estimated worth? Has there ever been any work done on evaluation or insurance, a rider for insurance? Then not necessarily in terms of dollar value, but family sentiment. That's big. I run into that a lot. Are there pieces in this that are important to the family as heirlooms? Is there something that has significance because it was grandma's and she always said, and things like that. So it's important to understand that as well. And the family sentiment piece, and I'm sure everyone here has either had or knows someone with a nightmare story about how there was some item of relatively low value, but the family locked horns over it, and there was a big battle, and crazy things happen when sentimentality come into it, let alone if something's expensive. What is the desired timeline? Again, I talked about a little bit near the beginning. There's time versus money, and what's more important. To some people, comfort and getting done is more important than getting every last nickel out of it. So it's important to understand what is the priority. Should it be done slower at a higher dollar volume, or should it be done quickly so it's all done and you don't have to worry about it? Market timing. There's another thing. Not only that sliding cultural window that I talked about, but sometimes there are things that happen. There's a movie coming out. We know there's a movie coming out in 6 months, and it's on a certain topic, and there's a lot of buzz about it, and so that means that maybe the market's a little bit more dynamic right now on certain things. We've always found that if it's connected to like a movie or a TV show, best time to get something sold is the week before it comes out. Because when it comes out, you're rolling the dice that it's terrible. And the minute that movie comes out and it's bad, down goes the market because now no one's interested. You know, the market's very fickle. So there's market timing to be considered. And I notice right now, you know, not a particularly great date to commemorate, but the Kennedy assassination's coming up this year, and I've had so many people call and say, I have President Kennedy memorabilia. You know, is now the time to sell it. So looking at things like that, is there an event, is there an anniversary, something like that? Obviously, your particular circumstances. You know, what are your circumstances? What are you trying to get accomplished? You know, and so discussing with your financial advisor any particulars that make your situation unique. And on that, I've got one more story to share with you. We had a family whose father was an ambassador for NASA, went around to schools doing presentations, and he was really kind of behind the scenes with NASA. And so over the years, he had picked up all of these amazing things that most people couldn't get. He actually had a piece of a space shuttle, like dashboard, you know, with you know, what are the dials and the stuff. And so he had this really cool stuff. And then he was also a bit of an eclectic guy, so we'd open a box and there'd be a box of fossils, and we'd open another box and it'd be a box of Duncan yo-yos. And so he just liked collecting all these different types of things. Now, unfortunately, he had spent more time spending money on that than he had on his family. So there was a little bit of resentment about, you know, how Dad spent his money. And there's all this stuff in the storage room. Let's get it dealt with. So we got in there and we started working through it. And, you know, so we would document what we were finding, catalog what we're finding, and we built an auction catalog that sort of, you know, laid everything out. And over time, the family tuned into the auctions, and when we talked to them later, they said it was actually a really cathartic experience because they learned so much about like who Dad was. There were things they didn't even know were in there. And there was a little bit more significance to the family. And when they got all done, we handed them a sizable check, and the mother said, I'm going to do the thing that we were always mad he never did, which was to take the whole family to Disneyland based on, you know, selling off the collection. And so it was a really interesting time for the family. They actually felt a little closer to Dad. They felt a little bit of resolution. So there's, you know, it's not always just dollars and cents. It's about that emotional tie and how things are getting handled. And so then I told you I'm going to give you a little bit of a pitch about what we do. We do expert evaluations. We have a lot of market knowledge on pop culture stuff. We have a really good fan base to sell things to. We have a network of professionals that we work with in case there's something we don't know or we want to bring in an expert. So those are the ways in which we can help. So if you want to stay in touch with what we do, we have a weekly newsletter where we talk about all this kind of stuff. We talk about collections that are coming out and things going on in the shop. We're happy to schedule a free consult, do a one-on-one with you if there's anything you want to talk about or a collection you might have and you're considering. So we're open to all that kind of stuff and happy to help however we can. And that's my presentation. So I will take questions. Yes?
What is it, they say you've got a house with exactly the same thing in it. What's the advantage of a estate sale or an auction? I'm not understanding.
That's a really good question. She said, what's the difference between an estate sale and an auction? You have a house full of stuff. And the way I tend to look at it, and of course, you know, mileage may vary. It depends on what company you're talking to. But in general, I find that estate sales companies do really well if the presentation of what's there does very well where it sits. So it's like if it's the old man Smithers house on the hill, there's a certain mystery to going into that house and seeing all the stuff that's in there. But they also do very well with big items. They want to sell the furniture or the china cabinet, the dining table, you know, a rug, a tapestry. They're looking to sell the bigger items so that they can go in and they kind of prefer their piece count to be low and their prices to be high. And that's kind of what they're looking for. They open a closet and there's a stack of boxes and each box has 100 things in it, like comic books or coins or stuff like that. They don't tend to love that as much because that takes more of a specific knowledge. Because if you think about it in terms of labor, how long will it take somebody, anybody who kind of understands how to do a little bit of research can go through and look each thing up. But if you have to stop and look each thing up, how much more time are you spending figuring that out? Whereas an expert could look at it and go, nothing, 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 nothing. Oh, there's a good one. And it's way faster. So I actually, I found that we work pretty well with estate companies because we can go in and so they're fine selling the big stuff where it sits. They open a closet, it's full of comic books. They give us a call, we come out, we help them with that piece of it. And then the other thing is if it's transportable, that becomes the other part. I don't do estate sales. I will go out and bring a U-Haul truck and we'll bring everything back to our facility down in Wixom. We have a 12,000 foot production facility, which you're all invited to come and see if you ever want to see what we do. And we'll spread everything out on the tables. We'll do our sorting and cataloging and we'll build an auction and then we'll sell everything at once. And the only other thing I will say, I think estate sales companies are fine. I'm not marketing against them in any way. But you want to be careful that you don't incentivize the estates company to not sell anything. There's sometimes a certain format where they'll be like, well, we'll do a sale for you, and then we'll clean the house out. And you don't want a situation where they've listed everything so expensively that nothing sells, and then you get to the end of the project and like, okay, there's your check for not much money, and now we'll clean the house out. Because guess what they're going to do with all the stuff they take out of the house? It's still going to go somewhere. So it's just, again, like estate sale companies are great for those good reasons, but just make sure that you're not incentivizing them to not sell your stuff.
Are
So,
your auctions online?
is that me?
No, it's a coffee.
Oh, it's the coffee. I'm like, am I rustling the microphone? Oh, okay.
Are your auctions online that you have?
Yes. Yeah. If you go to our website and you go to the shop link, it'll show you everything we've got online and you can see how they look. Any other questions? Yes.
You talked a lot about collections. You know, say we have comic books or something, but what if we only have like onesie, twosie, you know, little things, like my daughter has a big box of those little Polly Pockets that I know are going for, you know, more than what we bought them for. What do you do in that instance?
Yeah, so we will work remotely. And one thing I did want to mention is I apologize if anyone was talking with Ariel and then like it kind of ended. I think you had that circumstance. Ariel's no longer with the company, and so we've got Michelle, and she's doing a great job staying on top of it. So, but I'm gonna say to you, if you reach out to us and you send us some photographs and a description of what you have, you can text or email or however it works. We're happy to take a quick look at things like that and tell you in general if we think that it's something that we could help with, or you know what like a ballpark notion of value might be. If we have some place to send you, you know, we can get you in the right direction. You know, but people kind of show up all the time. You know, some people just hop in the car and walk in and surprise us. So we would prefer an appointment, but even if somebody walks in, if you walk in with an item or two, we'll sit down, we'll figure it out. So I obviously we love handling big collections, but that's not to say, it wasn't that long ago somebody walked in the store with just one binder. They had Pokemon cards in a binder and laid them on the counter and said, is there anything in here? And we started looking through and said, why, yes, there is. And we got one graded and we sold it for $7,600, I think. So, you know, one item can absolutely be worth handling if it's a good item. Did you?
For the amateur, can you recommend, if we want to do a little bit of research on our own, there are so many websites out there and most of them are overrated for, you know, if you try to do a little bit of research on your items as what they might consider the value to be. Are there any sources that you might recommend that tend to be a little bit more accurate as to doing a little research to determine that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of websites that are very good for specific things. There's a website, since I just mentioned Pokemon cards, there's a website called TCG Player, and they like list every trading card game there is. But what we find on those is they're a lot better to determine if you have a rare item. So that's the kind of thing, I use PSA Card for sports cards. So if I go, all right, so what I've got in front of me is a 1968 Topps baseball card set. We go in and we bring up their guide, and their market rates are ridiculous, and a lot of them aren't really truly what you're going to get. But if you look at their guide and they're like $10, $10, $10, $1,000, well, now you'll go, oh, well, what card, what is that one that's a lot of money? Oh, I'm looking for, and in that set, it's a Nolan Ryan, and there's a Nolan Ryan rookie card in that, so like, do I have that card? And it kind of flips it from having to look each thing up to I'm looking at the whole group and prioritizing by like, what are the 5 that I'm looking for, and those are the real money. Now, in terms of actually determining price, eBay's not bad. You just have to make sure that you're using the sold on the left-hand side where you can add filters. You want to make sure you pick sold, because anybody, I could go on with this Logitech slide clicker and put it on there and say I want $10,000 for it. I could list it for whatever I want. So just because you see someone listing an item for a price, that doesn't mean anything. You want to look at sold. What's it actually selling for? And then go, is that, and then consider those other things. Is it the same version you have? Is it the same condition you have? All those other issues. Where eBay sometimes falls through the cracks is their selling data, I think, only goes back like 45 days. So if it's something that has enough volume that it's selling a lot, you get good information from eBay. If it doesn't sell that often, you might not even find it there. To which case, there's a website called WorthPoint. WorthPoint.com. It does have a charge. It's not free, but I think it's like $10 a month. It's not crazy. And if you look enough things up, WorthPoint keeps historic data. They have eBay data going back to 2011. They have like Heritage is in there. A lot of the big auction sites, they kind of scrape selling data from a lot of sources. So it's nice to be able to go, well, here's an item. It doesn't show up all the time. Maybe only 1 or 2 of these sell per year, but now I can go back and look at all the times it showed up over the last 5 years. And is it going up or down, or what's it doing? So WorthPoint's actually a really good one as well.
It makes sense that, like you were talking about onesies or twosies or a whole collection. For instance, if you have a collection of Norman Rockwell, which never took off like investors thought it would, and you don't want to have to go, piecemeal each item. But if you can go in and, like you said, see more of the value of a larger collection all in one place to make it a little bit maybe so lesser labor intensive, if you will, about doing research. Is this WorthPoint.com a little bit more on that?
Well, it's still, I mean, you're still getting a per piece sale record on it. But what I do is on something like that, if I'm trying to get a general knowledge, rather than look up something specific, like if you have, Norman Rockwell is a huge manufactured collectible. So if you're like, well, I have Norman Rockwell plates from Franklin Mint or whoever would have made them, rather than look for like plate 2065, American flag or whatever it would be called, go in and go Norman Rockwell Franklin Mint plate and get that result set and then sort it by value, and then just look what hits the top of that value. So are there any things there that you're like, these are better? Or if you sort by value and the best one in the group is $20, you kind of know, well, you're there's probably not much there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
And you keep talking about value. If I came to you with an item, you would tell me the value, but would you also tell me what it's actually going for right now? Because it may be worth this much, but maybe there's an interest out there.
Well, yeah, I tend to go by market price. When I say value, I refer to market price, but it's also the difference in like what's your intention. Like I had mentioned, if you're putting together an evaluation so that you can get something insured, that's kind of one way of doing it. But if it's like, look, I want to sell this, what am I going to get if I put it on the market? That's a different number. So like your intention of like why you want it evaluated, it makes a difference. But yeah, when I talk generally about what is a market value on something, I'm talking about what's it actually going to sell for.
So I would have to tell you, this item I would like to keep, but I want to know the value of it, as opposed to this one, I want to clean out my collection and get rid of that, because I don't want to.
Yes. And I work both ways. So if it's strictly an evaluation, we do work on like an hourly basis or whatever. We can work on a project and get you a report, and there's a few ways of doing that. We do work like that. But I do have to say, most of the time, the kind of work we do for people is towards selling it. So I want to understand what this is, but I want to get it sold. So on our way to getting it sold, we're doing those evaluations.
At my age, I like collectibles. I mean, that's just what I did through the years. But there are certain items now that mean more to me, so I might still
Right.
want to keep them because I like looking at them.
Sure.
But then there's a big group of stuff that I need to move it out.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. So you might find something, you know, you're going through and you're thinking, well, I like this one, and it turns out maybe that's not the most valuable piece in the collection. You just like it. So if it's not worth a ton of money, maybe that's better for you because you're like, well, great, I can keep that, and I'm not really losing anything. Whereas, I found we had a guy we were working with on some old movie posters. And he had some like original Universal monster stuff from the 40s, and it was just an incredible collection. And when he found what the value of some of these posters were, he actually made the decision, I'm going to go buy lithographs because I want to see it. I want on my wall to see it, but I don't want $15,000 hanging on my wall. If it's 15 grand, I'll sell that, and I'll get myself a really nice professionally done lithograph, and I'll hang that instead, and I'll get the same use out of it. So, yeah, for sure, that can make a difference. Yep.
You have like market value that you tell us what it is. Do you sell that, or then do we go somewhere to be able to get that?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, if I think I have the buyers, then absolutely. Generally, my interest in helping you figure that out is so that I could go sell it for you. But if I don't think, I don't know, if you came to me with a collection of, Breitling luxury watches and they're worth, $800 to $1,000 each or something like that, I would not take that collection because I don't have a watch buying market. So I might be able to maybe give you some input on it or where you might be able to go, but I would not take that collection. So that's why if we do have other people that we know in the network, we're happy to send you in a good direction. So, yep, one more.
Yeah, so if we have onesie, twosie items, we look on eBay, and, it's going for, let's say, I have a candle that I looked on eBay, it goes for $100. Is your suggestion just to, sell that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable doing the process, if you have an item or two, sell it on yourself. The thing that you'll run into is, eBay's got a feedback system. Have you ever used it before? Are you going out there and you're selling something with, a zero feedback, which means you don't have any like market history of how honest you are? That can make a difference on what people are willing to pay. We'll find, I don't know what last time I looked at our feedback, we've got like 35,000, transactions or whatever it is. It's a crazy number. And so if someone looks at our rating, it's trustworthy because they're like, well, these guys are doing business that long and they've got a 99.9% success rate. So there are issues like that. However, you can never, eBay is going to take 13%. So if you take what eBay charges you, and then what the bite out of the transaction fee for the credit card, and you add that up, it's 13 to 15%. And so you selling that yourself, no one else is ever going to be able to sell it and get you any more money for that. But it does put you in the business of being the store. So you've got to list it. If you've got many items, you have to have some process of being able to, if something sells, you know where it's at. Then you have to pack it up and get it shipped, and then it ends up in Texas, and then they don't like the way you described it, and they found a chip on it that you didn't say was on it, and so now you're in a customer service situation. So just as long as you understand that you're kind of the store when you're doing that, obviously in terms of dollar return, there's no better way to sell it than selling it yourself. Yep.
Tell us what's hot now, and is there anything that you might be looking for that we might have in our basement?
Boy, that's honestly, that is so hard, because I'm not trying to be snarky, but my response is like, well, we're interested in things worth money, and so it's right, and so it's hard to say exactly what's on that list. Because, hey, we want comics. Comics are hot. But you know what? There's a lot of comics that aren't, so exactly which comics are hot, well, how much time you got. Sports cards are, a vast majority of sports cards really aren't worth all that much. But if you have that Nolan Ryan 1968 Topps card in really high grade, that's a huge card. I just had somebody walk in the shop. This is a weird one, but Dad passed away and not a collector of anything. And when they were going through his paperwork, out fluttered 4 sports cards. And it was the same 4 cards. A 1933 Gaudy Sport Kings Babe Ruth 4 times. And they're baffled. Why? That's all he had. He was not a sport card collector, never told the family, hey, I've socked these away for you or anything like that. So we went out, we got them graded. They were rough, so they weren't great grades, but those 4 cards graded a 1, a 1.5, and a 2 and a 3. So those 4 cards, those 4 little tiny pieces of paper, it's about $20,000 worth of cards. If you had asked me the day before, what are you hoping someone walks in here with tomorrow? If I listed 1,000 things, I probably would have not listed that card. But boom, there it is. It's really good. So it's about, I can't really exactly say, other than that we live in the pop culture world, so we're not looking for like antiques and furniture and lamps. We're not in that world. But of the types of things we carry from a pop culture perspective, always happy to look if you've got photos or here's what I'm looking at. Is this good? Is it not? Always happy to look at that.
You mentioned earlier in your presentation, none of our younger generation relatives want anything we have because we have Hummels and we have Precious Moments and we have Crystal and we have China and we have the Beanie Babies. We got into that sickness and we have our Department 56 Christmas Village pieces and nobody wants them. And I was afraid that you weren't going to say you're not looking for any of in those categories, any of those knickknacks. You got to dust them, put the china in the cabinet, any of those type of items which we maybe valued and we collected. It seems like, they're repurposing china. All these antique shops have tons of china for cheap, and what they're doing is bringing them up
flooding
with
out.
tabletops. Yeah. And at least they're repurposing them, but you're like, oh my goodness, they're breaking that up to make tabletops, with porcelain tops. But
I love stuff like that that's getting repurposed in terms of like arts and crafts, is like find another way to present it so it looks interesting, because that falls into that manufactured collectibles. It just breaks my heart sometimes when I see how much of that kind of stuff people have purchased, because that anything that was like subscription based, you got one each month for $30, or you got on QVC, or or as part of a series, the Franklin Mint type stuff, Yadro, Hummel. Again, everything has exceptions, so there's no blanket statement to go, well, none of that stuff is worth money, because then there might be one that, for whatever reason, is rarer and scarcer and is more in demand, and it might spike. But for the most part, manufactured collectibles, if they were making it was a series and everyone could sign up and they made 5,000 of those every time they made one, just generally not good news on the horizon.
which Beanie Babies did you say are the valuable ones?
Yeah, well, there's a couple, if they're the very first ones, which, and then they did a couple of, the ones that are interesting are actually licensed. They did like Godzilla Beanie Babies. But I'll tell you, the one that always comes up is people will say, I have the Princess Di, I have the rare Princess Di, and guess what? Everyone has the rare Princess Di. It's not, and I know we got to move along. I'm already over time here, and we got to talk about some values here. But the Beanie Babies and Black Diamond Disney VHS tapes both fall in this weird, there's a weird scam that goes on eBay where they will post a sale for like $10,000 on a common item. And if you look at sold on eBay for like on Beanie Babies, you'll see the great majority of whatever type of Beanie Baby it is are selling for $2 or what, just low money. But then all of a sudden there's a posted sale at like $10,000. And they do this with the Disney VHS tapes too. And we believe what is happening is if I can show that something sold for $10,000 on eBay and then I'm trying to sell you one for 100, I can say, look how much these go for. I'm going to give you a deal so that you can buy it from me for $100, and look at all the money you'll make on it, you know, because there's that posted sale. But in truth, they're only worth $5. So you do have to kind of take some of those. There's I don't know why Beanie Babies and Disney VHS tapes are like in that world. There's certain things in eBay where there's this weird kind of scam market thing going on with them. So you do have to watch out for that. Yep. Okay. One more.
Yes or no? I have several people, a lot of occupied Japan. Yes or no? Maybe.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes. There's definitely some yes in there.
Thank you.
Yes. All right.
And then I did talk to Scott because there were some that called and talked to Ariel. And based upon the description that Ariel had shared with me, some of those items are culture. So we're going to talk afterwards and he's going to put me in contact with some other potential people that we could invite to come in to actually look at some of those other collectibles that you may have.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. If there's something that doesn't fall into the categories we talked about today, I'm happy to connect you with other people that we know that might be able to help with stuff like that.
All right.
But I can talk about some stuff up here.
Can we all watch?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, unless anybody brought anything that they're concerned about, you know.
Don't get this information written down, like telephone numbers and.
I've got a flyer up here too for you. It's all on there if you want that. I've got business cards and a flyer if you want that. So this is a sealed set of Topps 2004 baseball cards. It's series 1 and 2. It's 732 cards, so it's basically a complete set of everything that they produced that year. Important thing on a lot of Topps things to know whether it's actually original or not is their shrink wrap is emblazoned with the Topps logo. So if there's ever one of these box sets and you're curious as to whether it's actually originally sealed or not, if it's just in blank shrink wrap, it doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't, because they didn't always use it, but as soon as you see the Topps logo on the shrink wrap, that's a pretty good sign that it's original. And there's no particular huge cards in this set, unfortunately. So a sealed Topps 2004 set goes for between $80 and $120. So it's a pretty good item. It's not huge. I love this. Is there anybody in here who can sing the Detroit Tigers song from '68? I'm not gonna. So this was a great souvenir that was produced. This one is in pretty nice shape on the jacket. It's got a little bit of wear, so I wouldn't say it was pristine. And what matters on records, of course, is also what the vinyl looks like. So if you hold this up to the light, that looks very mint. I don't see any scratches or scuffs on that. The other thing about album completeness is if the sleeve is still inside, you find this a lot of times on old records that the sleeve is gone because people got annoyed putting that record in and out of that sleeve. But if you put a record in and out of a cardboard sleeve, it'll end up getting scuffed up. So the sleeve's important to keep it in nice shape. It's been a minute since I had one of these. I would speculate that the value on that's going to be about $40.
When you were talking about records where you said the plastic was still intact, and it added more value to the record. I mean, I bought records when I was a kid. The first thing you did was open it up and play it, right? Why would somebody not have done that?
It's shocking, isn't it? You would think. As a record fan, I have had collections. I've had entire collections. I mean, like thousands of records come in from people who bought all that, box sets, original records, everything still sealed. Because, and I don't understand why either. I'm a big, of all the stuff we do, I find a lot of it fun, but my personal thing is music. I'm really into music, and I wouldn't buy it if I wasn't going to open it and play it. But there's a certain, I mean, people do it with toys. People do it with comic books. They buy it, and it goes right into a sleeve. They never crack the cover. So there's just yeah, you know, and of course we affectionately refer to it as a sickness. There's a collector's sickness. And you know, and so it's you just don't know what someone's into, and sometimes it's about the pursuit. I know a number of people who collect things, and once they have found it, it's almost like they don't care. It goes in a box and they're done. The excitement of it was, I'm looking for this thing, and where can I go and where can I find? Like that's the fun part. So yeah, I don't know. So this is actually a little lower. These are worth about $25. So a little lower than I thought. This one's in really nice shape. So it's a fun piece. And lastly, from the sports stuff, these are interesting. The 68 pennant is kind of interesting because whereas most pennants are just made out of the fabric and the screen printing that's on top of it, sometimes when they add this photograph piece, that's actually paper. That's paper that's glued on there like it's a frame, and the paper is almost never in good condition and very often has gotten, you know, punched out of it or lost or whatever. So we see a lot of these will come through and they won't necessarily have the photograph on them. So let's see, looking at that piece, the photograph has got some wear. It's a little crinkled. It's a little stained on the back. On the pennant itself, it shows a little bit of wear. It's got a crease out here on the tip of it, and it's also got some tack holes. So this was tacked to someone's bedroom wall at some point. So let's see, 68. If I go to my sports records here. I have a couple of different spots I use. I will do some general checking first on WorthPoint, and then I go into, there's some more specific things. If I can't find something on WorthPoint, I've got some other types of tools that I use. So I would say, so it looks like in really nice shape. So in like very clean mint condition, these can go up to $300. So that's not a bad find. So just accounting for the condition on it, being that there's a little bit of wear on it, I think this is probably $150. So that's a pretty cool one. Viewmaster. So how many people have or remember your old Viewmaster reels and your box of reels? Yeah. So the downside on Viewmaster, kind of getting back to the box issue, is everybody had the viewfinder and generally some kind of packaging, some kind of box or whatever. So of all of this, the least valuable stuff in it is actually the Viewmaster itself, because these are everywhere. This one is also, the Viewmaster is damaged. The box has some chunks out of it. So it's not in great shape. So just in terms of the hardware itself, I don't know, we're probably into about $5 on that part of it. Now what makes the difference? Oh, there's a great one. See, there's the 66 Batman series, and what is going to be the question is if it's complete. And complete in Viewmaster would be that we've got the booklet inside it, and then we've got the envelope for the reels, and there should be, I believe, 3 reels in this set. 1, 2, 3, yeah. So 3 Batman reels. So this is all complete, and it's in really nice shape. There's a little bit of wear on the package itself. But let's just see if we take a look under my source for Viewmaster stuff.
There must be things around people's houses that you didn't even think of that might be of interest.
Oh.
Because you mentioned that, I had mine like for years. I had it when I was young, took that with me.
Where is that?
Then my kids played with it, and my grandkids played. They loved that.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't even think of what I was thinking about my house.
it's been amazing sometimes. If you watch Antiques Roadshow, the number of times it's like, this is Grandma's candy jar, and it's been in the hallway, and it's just a green candy jar, and we've all been taking candy out of it all these years, and they're like, well, that's a $40,000 bowl. And, wow. So I mean, yeah, when we go in, I went in a house, based on there being stuff that kind of fits our categories, and I was going through, and I really wasn't finding much of value at all. But the guy had traveled to Peru several times in his life, and there's like a Peruvian street art kind of thing where they make these little like totems that are made out of like animal parts and horns and goat teeth and all that, and they're like the craziest, coolest thing. And if you pull them apart, there's like a little knife inside. And again, not that those are worth a ton, but if you'd have said, well, what are you looking for today that you're going to find interesting? Well, I'm looking for Peruvian street art, or like I would have never listed that. But when I ended up going through his house, like those were really cool, so I made him an offer and I just bought them because I thought they were neat. So yeah, this is as expected. The Batman set in loose shape can go for about $40. If these are in pristine condition, they go upwards of $100. So that becomes, for any Viewmaster stuff, it's about these packs, finding the ones, these are almost like finding a comic book, so do you have the right issue? There's another one here, Green Hornet. Does anybody remember who played Kato?
My husband would have, I don't remember.
Bruce Lee, yeah. On Green Hornet, that's Bruce Lee, early in his career. So the Green Hornet probably wouldn't be quite as worth as much as the Batman, but still a good piece. So I'm not going to go through all these, but if you're looking at Viewmaster stuff, these are what you're looking for and seeing which ones are in there, if they're in nice shape, if they're complete.
If you were a kid, you probably didn't have all that together either, because it was fun to pull pictures out.
Well, exactly. And then they get lost, they get worn. And so again, to your point of like, well, how many people had this and kept them brand new? Well, most people didn't. But that's why, if you find the one that's brand new still in the shrink wrap, that's why it's worth so much more, because no one really kept it that way. Yes?
I heard that sometimes an autographed baseball card will be worth less if it didn't have the autograph.
True. If
how many's out there, the value?
so the question is, can an autograph on an item, sports card specifically, but can an autograph on any item actually make it worth less? And that's true. If the autograph in question can't be authenticated, then it's just considered an imperfection. It's the same as just scribbling on a cover with a marker. It doesn't matter for anything. But something like a Stan Lee autograph on a comic book, if it's authenticated, it can take a relatively worthless comic book and make it worth $500 because it's a Stan Lee autograph. So sports cards are the same. So it would have to be, and what's interesting is an autograph, even if it's suspected to be real, of like a lesser player that no one cares about, just doesn't add anything. But if you have a Hank Aaron autograph on a baseball card and it has provenance or it has authentication, then it can make it be worth a lot more.
I got several of the 68 Tigers.
Do you? So some of those may be worth authenticating. You got to figure authentication is going to cost you about $50 an autograph. And so if you get that done, does it add enough in value? So if you go and you have an object and we're going to send it in and spend $50 and get it authenticated and we get it back and it's worth $60, there's no point. But if we could send it in and now it's worth $300, then there's a reason to do it. Yeah, I think this is a really cool item. So this is a McCormick bourbon whiskey Elvis decanter. Now it's in really rough shape. See that box is banged up. The top is completely missing. Yeah, the insert. So the insert's there, but it's pretty rough. The decanter itself. No, it's empty. But isn't that cool? So it's got, and it's actually, there's a music box in the bottom, so.
But the seal's not broken, is it, on the top of his head?
Yeah.
Oh, it is
Yeah.
broken?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's open. He's been opened. I would, let's see when this was made.
No, that's Lauren's in the office.
Is it?
Lauren is
Oh, I should
she
have
is,
guessed that.
she
I know.
is a huge
I know.
Elvis collector, and she's like,
I know, I saw her bedroom when she was little. I know exactly, yeah, I know.
so, she has all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, when she sent us a couple photos and said, "Is there anything?" or whoever did, if it came from you, you know, do you want me to bring anything? And I just went like, I have to see that decanter. That looks really cool.
And she said she has so much other things that she would have brought, but her grandmother just passed away.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
funerals
Yeah,
today,
today,
so,
yeah.
this whole week was kind of crazy for her, so she wanted to bring more, or provide more,
Yeah.
just couldn't.
Now, let's see, when were these made?
Does it say 68?
77. So these were made in 77. I would highly advise against cracking open anything, you know, past 30, 40 years and trying it out. We will sometimes get, you know, like old packs of sports cars that still have the gum in them from, you know, 1960. Highly recommended that you don't just pop that in your mouth. So this is a pretty cool item in nice shape. If they're open, these are worth about $150 or $200. And then shockingly, if it's still sealed, these are worth about $1,000, which would be crazy. And they don't pop up that often. So this would be a really rare find to find one of these that hasn't been opened. So, but that's a really neat piece. I appreciate her bringing that in for me to look at. All right.
Terry also reached out to Ariel and didn't hear back from Ariel, so she still brought her things, but
All right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's sorry if we. All right. So that looks like Beethoven. Oh, Chopin, okay. So this is 1940, it says 1943?
Yep, that's my mother's. It's a music box, and the music still plays.
Huh, interesting. So it's got a 1932 inscribed on the back of the piano. JRVHL. Probably it's going to be the maker's mark. It's actually written, it says Wagner on the bottom. So that might not necessarily indicate who the, artist is, or the musician is, but yeah, could be the name of the artist, maybe too. Let me see. This one, now, is there any provenance on that? Is there anything about where it came from, or?
No, it must have been an anniversary gift, or an engagement gift to my mom. Probably anniversary gift, it was 43, because they got married in 40. And she just loved it, and then of course I inherited it after she put on.
Yeah, this one might be tricky to find. Yeah, I think this one's interesting. I think this is going to take a little bit more time than we can just do quickly. Wait. Huh. J.B. Hirsch? No, this is JRVHL. Oh no, it does have a, whoops, I better be careful. He might not be affixed. JH. Yeah, I think I found an alternative. Does this play God Bless America? No. Is there a button to press?
In the back, I think there's one at the end there.
Ah, there. I watched too many horror movies, so I'm programmed to hear that and be scared of it. If you ever hear that in an abandoned house, get out. Yeah. So there's one that looks very, very similar, but it's got different work around the top, but the piano and the figure are the same. And it's 1932 by J.B. Hirsch, and it says this is Beethoven at the piano. So it's not the same one, but I'm pretty sure it's a similar make.
That might be, yeah.
So I think that would be a lead to find this specific one. But that one, so one sold in 2011 is like the last hit that I get on it. Well, there's another one. J.B. Hirsch, Beethoven. They're calling this Beethoven. Yeah. There it is. I found the exact one. So one sold in 2016 for $275. Let's see if I can find any more recent examples than that. Let's see. Oh, it's interesting. So they told you Chopin, and it's written Wagner on the bottom, but it's Beethoven. And this is the fun of trying to figure out old stuff like this. So yeah, again, so we don't, I don't want to take up too much time working on that, but I think you probably, so this one has a little bit of wear on it. There's a little bit of, paint chipping on the head. There's a little bit of the filigrees gotten worn off around the top there.
That was just for relaxing,
Yeah.
stressful day.
So that's a very neat piece, and yeah, I think you're probably $150 to $200-ish on that. Yeah, and so these are a little easier, but there's a couple things that I brought along. We just brought this, we bought a whole collection of Marvel figures from North Carolina, and we brought them all back. So sometimes these Bowen statues can be really good. This one's worth about $700. It's Thanos. The guy, this is an interesting collection because the guy was really into Terminator. And he's got two of the full-size, the life-size endoskeletons, the silver robots with the red eyes. And they're about $10,000 each for those full-size ones. But he was a Marine, and he was really into the realism of the weapons. And so he had restocked anything he had that was on display with actual firearms. So one of the things he was warning us, as you're going through the collection, I think I got it all out. But you might find a live, handgun or whatever. So he apparently on his display, I didn't see his display because it was all in storage, but when he had it out for display, he actually had a 50 caliber machine gun hanging on his wall. So, everybody's into something. So then these are kind of fun. This is, I think it would go like this. These, everybody remember the Warner Studio stores that were in malls in the 1990s? They had a special collectibles section where they sold framed pieces. And at the time, the run on these was fairly good. I mean, it was like several hundred. So it didn't quite get to, they didn't produce thousands, they produced hundreds. And once those stores were gone, these pieces weren't really getting made in any other way, so it's kind of cool. Old animation cells from that. They have like bigger, that would appear to be like fully painted pieces, 3 feet, 2 feet, like really big stuff. And whenever we find collections like this, they do really well because they're hard to find. So we expect this will probably bring about $800 at auction. Yeah, for an animation cell. And
Just this one would be fine if you don't want to take the time with that one. That one I got I know it's a long story clock, but that's all I know. And I got it at Salvation Army for like $8.
I think you did well.
Yeah.
Just based on how it presents. It's embroidered. And embroidered tapestry. I don't see any
I've interpreted
maker mark on it.
it as being a spring piece, but yeah, there's no maker's mark as far as I know.
How long ago did you get that?
It's been about 15 years.
Did you buy it this way, or did you get it framed?
That's it. It was
Yeah.
on the floor in
Yeah.
Salvation Army, just like that.
Yeah.
And I don't
I'll
think
tell you
it
what.
was even $8.
Well, the frame itself, this is a really well done custom frame. So, yeah, I mean, whoever had this piece done, they probably spent at least $150 or $200 just getting it framed.
I was offered $125 for it by a guy that said, "No, I know nothing about this, but I'll give you $125." So I went, "Nah, I think I'll hang on."
Maybe you've got something you know about it. Well, I wish I could express more of an opinion on it other than the fact that it's really well framed and it's a cool piece. 'Cause I don't know anything about tapestry or art or anything, so.
So I have done some research. The Hmong had no language, so that's how they express themselves, and mostly Vietnam pieces. So I wanted to know that because that's unique. I need to find somebody that might be able to tell me more about it.
I think I can give you a referral to someone who would know more than I would. And if they don't, they're in circles where I think the next step would be. So, yeah, absolutely. Love to help with that, but I don't personally know enough. And I can,
Your next posters that are signed, they call it a remark, he does a.
right, the drawing, yeah.
And he signs it.
Mm-hmm.
Every drawing, or just-
Remarks tend to add value in general, yeah, because it's just something more interesting on the piece.
Because I had one framed, and I know, just looking at it, it's expensive framing.
Yeah, sometimes, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. The number of times I've seen literally an $8 poster that you bought, from Hot Topic, and it's in a, $200 frame, and, it's just kind of a waste based on the piece it is. But I mean, the framing makes such a huge difference for the environment. We're handling a collection that's a lot of, they're called Mondo. They're Mondo, like they're not reproductions, but they're like a modern interpretation of old horror movies. So they do Frankenstein, Dracula, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and they're these just beautiful art. And the guy who had them had every single frame customized to what the piece was. So like the Dracula, the frame is like Gothic stonework, like from an old castle. And each one, like the Frankenstein one, is done like the countryside, like the small village. So it's done in a real kind of small village, like woodworking. And each one is completely unique, and it's just amazing. But the thing is, the thing you got to remember about framing is you better love it, because probably no one is ever going to pay you what that frame is worth. As cool as they are. As soon as you're like, well, I spent $500 getting that done because it's so cool. Well, that next person doesn't necessarily, they're not going to attach that, This guy actually had a piece, I'm rambling a bit, but this guy actually had a piece that he had it framed, and he wanted a larger piece framed because he had a safe in his wall. So he did a frame that was on a hinge, and he like mounted it flush. The back side of the frame was in the wall, and so if you opened it up, there was a safe behind it. So yeah, that's cool. But again, like no one else is ever going to care. Whatever he spent to have that done, you know, it's not going to necessarily translate through on price. So I hope it was informative and entertaining, and you learned something. Thank you.